evening and welcome to Viewpoint Berwick Region. I'm L.A. Tarone, and our guest tonight is State Representative John Gordner. And we'll be back to discuss things around our area and what happened in the two-year legislative session in Harrisburg with Mr. Gordner in just a couple of minutes. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Enjoy it. And good evening and welcome to WYLN TV's Viewpoint Berwick Region. Our guest tonight is in his fifth term now in the State House after you took over after Ted Steuben retired. State Representative John Gordner. Mr. Gordner, great pleasure to have you here tonight.
Glad to be here on this wonderful wintry evening here.
Yes, yes. Earlier this week on radio, I ran a soundbite from House Republican leader John Purcell, who described the two-year session as a smashing success. Followed that with a soundbite from Democrat leader Bill DeWeese, who called it a dismal failure. You're generally seen as being kind of moderate. What was your assessment of the last 2 years in the General Assembly?
Somewhere probably in between. We were able to accomplish some things. We were able to force the issue, for instance, on grants for volunteer fire companies. That was something that was the first time that was ever done, around $25 million for that. Hopefully people got their $100 property refund check in the mail in October. That was a $320 million rebate, the first time that was ever done. And yet we didn't do anything to expand the PACE program, prescription drug. We didn't finish up the tobacco settlement, so there was a lot of things still left on the table.
That $100 rebate, as a matter of fact, I just saw a story in, I think it was the Standard Speaker the other day, where there still are a number of people who are forwarding their $100 paycheck, their $100 rebate checks to their local school district and are still calling it an election year ploy.
Well, unfortunately, to a lot of degree, it was an election year ploy. It was never done before. It was done this year in election year. The checks came out 2 weeks before the election. I don't know that we'll do it again next year. But from my standpoint, it was a way to get $320 million back to the people that were paying their taxes. And so certainly I supported it. There was a lot easier and better ways to do it, a lot cheaper ways of doing it than the way it was done, but it was still a way of returning some money back to the people.
Now, you mentioned the PACE program. Again, this was also categorized as an election year ploy. Along party lines, the Republican majority in the State House passed a prescription drug bill, as they called it. It lowered the PACE, the co-payment by about $20 a year, but broke it up into 12 equal installments. And a lot of Democrats, I think you were among them, who said this bill is never going to go anywhere in the Senate. And actually, it turned out to be right. It died in committee in the Senate.
Yeah, for the past 3 years or so, the House Democratic Caucus has been trying to expand the PACE eligibility program. We deal with literally hundreds of folks in my district offices that need assistance for the PACE program. And a lot of them are just a few $100s short or $500 short, or they get a 2% increase in their Social Security check, and that kicks them out. And so what the House Democratic Caucus has been saying is take some of the money from the tobacco settlement and put it towards expanding the PACE program. The Republicans in the House were opposed to it, came up with their own plan the last week of September. The second week of October, we passed it. They guaranteed that we would accomplish this before our session ended. And of course, the bill went over to the Senate and never even had a hearing.
Now, that Democrat plan, however, was criticized by Republicans for a number of reasons. For a number of reasons. I believe the package as a whole had 18 separate bills in it. And the Republican criticism was that the income limits were too high, that it spent far too much, and it had the state government pretty much micromanaging health care on a local level.
And this again is where you take hopefully some of the good ideas from the one plan along with some of the good ideas for the other and try to come up with something in the middle. Again, my frustration with Harrisburg is that, especially in Harrisburg, a lot of things are Democratic partisan, Republican partisan, and you can't just work towards a good goal. But you know, from my standpoint, let's just get a plan that's going to get more folks into the program, get prescription drug assistance to them, and help out these folks on a fixed income. And that's what we should have done.
Now, this year it was even worse because it's an election year, and everybody who doesn't realize that the entire state house, all 203 seats, are up for election every 2 years, so everybody was making their pitch to get a lot of publicity at home and that sort of thing. So that worked against any bipartisanship, I would imagine.
Sure, and from September on, it was actually 100 Democrats, 100 Republicans.
That's right.
It was a tie there for several months, and so that even made it more difficult.
Along health care lines, the state Senate passed a bill that died because it never made it to the House, but it may come back again. I forgot by whom it was written. It tried to make a pitch for either a congressional action to limit drug company advertising or to limit the avenues that it could be done in Pennsylvania. It seems to me there may be some constitutional questions for it, but the main argument was that drug companies spend so much money advertising their product directly to consumers that is one of the reasons that drug prices are as high as they are. Do you think there's any merit in that argument? Will anything like that come up in the House, do you think?
I think there's a lot of merit. I think Senator Murphy from out in the Pittsburgh
Tim Murphy,
area,
that's who it was, that's right.
And he actually is a medical professional. Before he became a state senator, was the one that was advocating that. It's just been in the last 5 or 6 years that pharmaceutical companies have been able to advertise directly to the public. Prior to that, they always did their marketing to the physicians and the hospitals and those things. I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal that said in 1991, 1992, pharmaceutical companies spent about $200 million on advertising. Last year, they spent $1.7 billion in advertising, and there's no doubt that has increased the amount of prescriptions that people are using, and it's increased the demand, and the cost has gone up, and it's a bad cycle.
I guess, you watch a hockey game or something and you see an ad for some hair growth product, and then I guess a lot of guys will run to their doctor the next day and say, hey, I saw this thing on television, could you write me a prescription for it? I guess that was Murphy's argument.
Sure. In the past, you went to the doctor and the doctor told you what sort of prescription drug made sense for you. Now a lot of people are going to the doctor and saying, I want this prescribed to me. I want this prescribed to me. And it's not the generic version, it's the full cost version. Yeah. I have a subscription to Time magazine, and about 3 or 4 weeks ago I went through and there were more ads for prescription drugs in Time magazine than there were for car companies. So it tells you the amount of increase in advertisements that have been out.
It is worth noting, for example, in Great Britain they can't advertise directly to the public, and in Canada there is a pretty tight legislative hold as to what types of pharmaceuticals can be advertised. I know there's some movement in Congress to maybe try to do that as well, so I guess this isn't necessarily isolated to Pennsylvania.
Right, and you do have to be cautious that you do want people to be informed.
And there's also a First Amendment argument.
Sure.
It's my product, I have a right to sell it any way I want.
Sure, but again, up until about 5 or 6 years ago, they weren't able to advertise directly to the public, which they're able to now, so you need to find that happy medium, hopefully.
I have a bunch of contentious issues in Harrisburg, which we'll get to in just a moment. Our guest tonight is State Representative John Gordner. Sorry to tell you that our phone system is down tonight, so we're not able to take any phone calls. We hope to have it back for our next program. But this is Viewpoint Greater Berwick, Viewpoint Berwick region. That's State Representative John Gordner. I'm L.A. Tarone, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to WYLN TV's Viewpoint Berwick region. I'm L.A. Tarone, and our guest tonight is State Representative John Gordner. John, you just mentioned in passing the tobacco settlement, and that Pennsylvania is one of the very few states in the country that really hasn't decided what we're going to do with it. You want to explain how much money the state has already gotten and what's happening with it and some of the proposals that had gone back and forth? Most of it was to spend it on health care. Even Governor Ridge was in favor of spending almost all of it on health care.
Sure. As a result of the lawsuit against the tobacco companies, Pennsylvania was one of 46 states that settled with the tobacco companies, and as a result of that, Pennsylvania will be getting around $410 million million a year for the next 25 years. And 42 of those 46 states have already decided how to disperse those monies. Pennsylvania has already gotten their first year allotment, a little over $420 million, and it's still sitting in a fund at this point.
It's in a separate fund. It hasn't been commingled with the general fund or anything, so it can't be hit for general government spending or anything like that?
We did pass a bill to establish a trust fund, so it is sitting in that trust fund. It is drawing interest, but it's not helping out anyone sitting there. To our credit, Governor Ridge, the House Democrats, the Senate Democrats, the Republicans in both caucuses all agree that 100% of it should go to health-related issues. So we're not going to use it for roads or bridges or anything along those lines. But there's a lot of interest groups that are after that money, and that's been the contention. Again, we finished our 2-year session without dealing with the issue. But the main idea is to and this is where the House Democrats and Republicans agree to use a part of it to expand the PACE program. The Senate Republicans and Governor Ridge are opposed to that. They think we should wait and see what happens at the national level before we do anything. There's been proposals to use some of the monies for tobacco cessation programs, use some of the programs to stop teens from beginning to smoke, use some of the monies to help hospitals with their uncompensated care, because a lot of our hospitals across the state are in bad shape. And
some of that is a little creative accounting, to be perfectly honest, though.
It can be. And part of the money to provide for uninsured working families for health care. So those folks that are working but not insured, to provide a fund for them.
There were some other offbeat proposals. I know Kevin Blom from Wilkes-Barre, I believe he proposed using some of it for, I think it was college education in the healthcare field or something like that. Can we assume that those types of proposals are pretty much not going to happen?
Yeah. I think whenever we pass it, and hopefully it's sooner rather than later, 100% of it will go to health or wellness related issues and not to those other things. And the other thing that all of the plans do is take a portion of the money and put it in a separate trust fund, so that 25 years from now when this money runs out, there's still a pot of money to keep it going.
So you're not going to have a situation like we do on the federal level with with Social Security, for example, where it's hit all the time to cover other general government expenses and there's a pile of IOUs there and maybe not necessarily any money. That won't happen here.
No, this is a separate trust fund, and again, all the plans say take 25 million or so of that a year, put it in even a separate one, let it grow so that after the money runs out, or even the way it works is as people smoke less, the states get less.
Right.
So we may start by getting 420 million, and 5 or 10 years down the road get 300 million. So you need to be able to have some money available to take care of that shortfall.
We changed gears completely. I picked up 2 newspapers this morning and I saw 2 stories about a bill that on radio we ran a story about when it passed about 3 weeks ago. It started in the State House with a guy named Chuck McElhaney from suburban Philadelphia, and it changed the way liquor licenses are granted in Pennsylvania. It does away. You want to explain a little bit, because I know it gets rid of the resort designation and also makes the licenses available county-wide rather than by municipality.
Sure. It's one of those interesting bills that towards the last day or two of session, a lot of different components went in and out of it. But the major part of it is, right now, each municipality has a certain amount of liquor licenses allowed. Basically, it's 1 per 3,000 people. But they grandfathered in all the liquor licenses before that 1 per 3,000 came into effect. So Berwick, which has maybe 12,000 people in it, certainly has more than 4 liquor licenses. But municipalities are capped. You can't have any more than what was grandfathered in. And what you've had, though, is a lot of the stores like Applebee's or other Red Lobster or something coming in, and they need a liquor license. So places have been applying for a resort license. Resort license was started out to be meant for a place like the Poconos or some resort designation. Right now, I think there's over 300 or 400 resort licenses across the state.
A lot of resort areas.
You figure if there are 300 or 400 resort areas. There was one applied for in Bloomsburg. And so what they've said now is we're going to eliminate that. No more resort licenses. But what we will allow is a liquor license to be transferred from one municipality in a county to another municipality in the county, provided that the municipality where that liquor license is leaving is agreed to by the governmental officials in that municipality.
So conceivably, a liquor license could be transferred from, say, Berwick to Bloomsburg.
That's correct. Berwick Borough, if it's from Berwick to Bloomsburg, Berwick Borough Council would have to approve that, and the town of Bloomsburg would have an opportunity to indicate to the LCB why they would not want it. But yes, there could be transfers like that.
Governor Ridge has, he's apparently out of Harrisburg. He may be out of the country. He's supposed to be back in his office December 6th. Any idea whether he would sign it or not? It appeared to be something that he
yes.
would, he will
yes,
sign?
he has agreed to sign that.
Okay. There was Paul Clymer, who is a Republican from suburban Philadelphia. We saw the catastrophe we've had in Florida. Clymer held a press conference a while ago and said that there might be something, now this is before the election, that because of the motor voter bill, that there was still something like 10,000 dead people registered to vote in Pennsylvania, another several thousand registered in 2 or 3 places, and I think it was the House State Government or Local Government Committee that began looking at making some sort of change to maybe eliminate that, but a 2-year purge is no longer legal on federal law. What are you going to do? That could potentially be a big problem.
Yeah, it's a difficult issue. Obviously, motor voter was well intended. It was passed by Congress.
I was doing talk radio when it was proposed. I was vehemently opposed to it. Thought it was a horrible bill.
Well, some of that is coming true. Again, it was passed by Congress onto us. The idea was to allow more people to vote, which you want to try to encourage. But the problem is that you can't purge people off the rolls, I think, for 6 or 8 years. And so there's lots of people on the rolls that aren't supposed to be on the rolls, and that's where you run into problems with dead people, people that have moved.
College kids.
College kids. We certainly have that in Bloomsburg. Yeah. And in that part of it makes it very difficult. So I think Congress needs to revisit the issue. And Paul Clymer's chair of the State Government Committee, but I'm not sure what we can do at our state level because there's certain mandates that Congress gave to us.
Another voting issue. State House and State Senate have both been looking at internet voting from a polling place. Do you think that's going to come back in 2 years? And
I don't really like that. I don't know why we still vote on Tuesdays. I mean, I don't know why we don't vote on Saturdays, for instance. I was talking to my father about this the other day, but I'm not sure about mailing in or internet voting at this point.
Let me hold it right there. We'll come back. This is Viewpoint Viewpoint Berwick region. I'll get the name right yet. This is L.A. Tarone State Representative John Gordner. We'll be right back. Yep. And we are back on WYLN TV's Viewpoint Berwick region with our guest state representative John Gordner. John, you were just starting to talk about, you may not necessarily be wild about internet voting, but you have some other ideas about voting, how we might be able to make a few adjustments here and there?
Yeah, I'm certainly open, and I think we ought to try to make it more uniform. I don't know if doing that across the country makes sense, but certainly across the state, we have the machine votes, we have the electronic votes, we have the hole punch votes, and it does make sense to make it more uniform and more accessible.
There are 2 bills that are promised in the Senate in January. Stuart Greenleaf, a Republican from suburban Philadelphia, and Jack Wagner, a Democrat from Pittsburgh, are both promising to introduce bills to do something like that. So I guess you're going to be dealing with that in the House probably early on.
The big question is the cost. I think Luzerne County has looked, I think Luzerne County is still using the machines that they've been using for 50 years.
From the New Deal, actually. They were bought in about 1934, yes.
But the problem has been the cost to replace them, and maybe that's where the state can jump in and help out.
Let's change gears completely. Now, this is not necessarily in your district, but the state representative from your neighboring district is George Hasse, and Route 93 starts in the 116th, runs through Hasse's district, and ends in yours, the 109th. It's the major road between Hazelton and Berwick. It is 2 lanes with a low speed limit. Hasse has been screaming for years that it should be expanded to 4 lanes. What about that? Would you think that's a good idea?
I think it's a great idea. When I go to Harrisburg, I go 93 to 81 and go 81 south. And certainly in the mornings, I'm following the gravel trucks and stuff over there. I think the problem has been that it's not centrally enough in anyone's district, that when it comes time to pressing for 1 or 2 projects, it's not the top 1 or 2 project for any of us. And maybe what we really need to do is band together and make sure when the next 12-year plan comes out that we all work together to make it one of our top. But it really needs to be done.
when you go back to the two-year session in January, you're probably going to be looking at a light pollution bill from Bruce Smith from York. It failed this time, but he's promised already to bring it back. You have any thoughts about that, about errant light? And because I know a lot of the astronomical societies are saying that light pollution is destroying our ability to look in the sky and that kind of thing.
Not familiar with that one at all.
Oh, okay. Okay, because I ran a couple of sound bites from him saying that he would probably want to do that again. You had mentioned the Stony Brook development. The people who live there say they had gotten hit with two different sewage bills, and you were working on legislation that would sort of treat developments like that a little bit differently from an incorporated municipality.
Yeah, introduced two bills in October, obviously towards the end of the session, so we didn't get any movement on them, but I did get some bipartisan sponsors that we want to get started again in January. And the basic idea is if you're a regular tenant, not a mobile home tenant, but a regular tenant, if you're not happy with your situation with your landlord, you can take off your furniture and move. Folks that own mobile homes don't have that mobility. There's 200 mostly elderly people up in this one trailer park, and they're really getting the raw end of the deal in a lot of ways. And as a result of their problems, we've looked at the act and saw that there's a lot of shortcomings. So I've introduced some bills that would give folks that have their own mobile home in a trailer park more rights. Some advocacy things, some things dealing with rent increases, with sewer issues, and hopefully we can get those moving in January.
Another thing that you were looking at, I'm not familiar with whether you actually did introduce legislation or you will when the session comes back. We're about to get another area code, and you could find yourself in the position of having the stupidity of having to dial an area code to call Wallopin from Berwick.
You might have to call an area code to call across the street from you under this plan. Because what they've proposed doing, and basically they were going to agree to it back in September, is do what's called an overlay. So it's not a split. When they put in the new 570, they did a geographic split. Southern part of the area got to keep 717, northern part of the area got 570. They're talking about putting in an overlay, which means that everyone in the 570 area code will have to dial 10 digits, first of all. And if someone new moves across the street from you, from out of the area, they may be designated the new area code. So to call across the street, you may have to have that new area code. And what's happening is all the cell phones, all the computer lines, and if any company comes into the area and they request numbers, the PUC gives them 10,000 numbers.
Yeah.
They may only use 100 of them, but they're given 10,000, so there's a whole mess of numbers that are sitting out there being unused. We're proposing to call them back. And also saying if you need to do a new area code, give the cell phones and give the computer lines the new area code. Don't give it to the land-based lines, but use that instead.
Has anybody thought of maybe adding one digit to everybody's phone number, like a 4-digit exchange, 7591? It would seem to me that would open up a whole bunch of numbers.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's doable or not.
Okay, and we have about 40, not even 40 seconds left. All right, not a lot of time to get into anything else. Briefly, though, you were strongly in support of a bill which required prior notification before the closing of a mental health facility. I guess aimed mainly, in your case, at Danville State Hospital. We
want to keep Danville State Hospital available and open for the patients that need it, and working with Senator Helfrich and Representative Belfani and I and Representative Fairchild on a bipartisan way to do that. The bill got passed the House, did not get taken up in the Senate, but we're going to try that again in January.
So you'll have to reintroduce it, pass it again in the Senate, and then it has to go to the House. I'm sorry, you have to start it in the House and then through the Senate.
Yeah, the problem is I don't think the governor's going to sign it because it would take away the governor the ability to close places like that, so I'm not sure the governor's going to agree to it.
Okay. I guess that we're about out of time for the evening. All right. Thank you very much for coming on tonight.
Glad to be here.
And you have an open invitation to come back whenever you want.
Thanks.
Our guest has been State Representative John Gordner. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another show for you. As we tell you all the time on radio, if you can do it, it ain't bragging. We'll see you again.